It was late, the kind of late when most of the city had gone quiet, but the tall glass tower still glowed against the Chicago skyline. Inside, the marble floors echoed under the steady steps of Henry Webb, a night guard who had walked these halls so long he could trace them in the dark. His shift was always the same, checking doors, watching cameras, drinking coffee strong enough to keep his eyes open until dawn. Henry wasn't the kind of man anyone noticed. During the day, executives in polished suits rushed past without so much as a nod. To them, he was invisible, just another uniform who belonged to the background. But when the lights dimmed and the silence settled in, Henry carried the weight of the building alone. That night, something felt different. As he made his rounds, his eyes caught a glow spilling from an office that should have been empty. The door stood ajar, just enough for him to see a shadow moving inside. He paused, uneasy. It wasn't unusual for late-night workers to burn through their deadlines, but this felt wrong. Through the glass, Henry saw her. Amanda Blackwell, the woman who ran the foundation headquartered on the top floors, a name that carried weight in circles Henry would never step into. She wasn't commanding a room now. She sat slumped over the edge of her desk, one hand clutching her temple, her body trembling in a way that made his stomach tighten. At first, Henry thought she was simply exhausted. Everyone in this building lived on stress and caffeine. But then he noticed the details, the uneven way she tried to move her arm, the way her lips parted as though searching for words that wouldn't come. Henry froze in the doorway, his pulse quickening. He had seen this before. Years ago, his wife Rachel, an emergency nurse, had drilled it into him. The signs you never ignore, the drooping face, the weak arm, the words that come out tangled and heavy. She used to say, if you ever see this, Henry, don't wait, don't question it, act. And now, on a quiet night in an office tower, those warnings returned with brutal clarity. Amanda Blackwell wasn't just tired, she was in the first moments of a stroke. Henry's hand hovered near the phone clipped to his belt. He knew the protocol said to keep distance, to report and let others handle it. But this wasn't just company policy anymore. This was life or death, 60 seconds that could change everything. He stood there for one breath, torn between hesitation and instinct, and then he moved. Henry pushed the door open with the quiet care of a man stepping into dangerous ground. The air inside the office felt heavy, charged with something he couldn't name. Amanda lifted her head at the sound, her eyes glassy and unfocused, as if she couldn't quite place who was standing in front of her. When she tried to speak, the words came out thick and broken, nothing like the sharp voice that once commanded conference halls. "I'm fine," she managed, her lips struggling to shape the sounds. But her left hand lay motionless on the desk, limp no matter how hard she tried to lift it. Henry's chest tightened. He had seen this before in hospital waiting rooms, sitting beside Rachel as she explained the warning signs to worried families. His late wife's voice filled his mind, calm and certain even now. Don't ignore it, don't waste time. He crouched near Amanda's chair, steadying her trembling shoulder. "Mom, you're having a stroke. You need help right now," he said, his voice firmer than he expected. One hand was already on his phone, dialing for an ambulance with practiced speed. Fear flickered across her face, not just because of her failing body, but because she realised this stranger, this night guard she'd likely passed dozens of times without a glance, knew exactly what was happening to her. In her eyes, Henry wasn't invisible anymore. As the dispatcher spoke in his ear, Henry positioned her gently, remembering Rachel's late-night lessons about keeping airways clear and pressure steady. He checked her pulse with the precision of someone who had done it 100 times in practice, not in theory, but in the quiet intimacy of a marriage where medical talk spilled over into everyday life. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens began to rise through the empty streets below. Henry stayed at her side, grounding her panic with steady words. "You're not alone. Help is coming. Just focus on breathing. Stay with me." Amanda clung to his sleeve with the strength she had left, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fragile trust. In that moment, she wasn't the powerful woman whose name was printed in magazines. She was just a human being fighting for her life, depending entirely on the man who usually swept the floors unseen. And Henry, carrying the memory of his wife's promise, refused to let her slip away. The shrill cry of sirens grew louder until red and blue lights spilled across the glass walls of the tower. Within moments, paramedics rushed through the lobby and up the elevator, guided by Henry's steady voice on the phone. When they entered the office, they seemed surprised to find a night guard crouched beside a powerful executive, already giving precise details about what had happened. Her speech slurred about 5 minutes ago, Henry explained quickly. Left arm weak, face drooping. Symptoms came on sudden. He spoke with calm certainty, repeating the words Rachel had drilled into him during quiet nights when she returned from long shifts. The paramedics exchanged a glance, recognizing that he wasn't guessing. He knew. They moved Amanda carefully onto a stretcher, and Henry stayed close, answering every question about the timing and the progression of her symptoms. Amanda's hand searched for his as they wheeled her out, and he let her hold onto his sleeve until they reached the ambulance doors. "How did you know?" she whispered, her words thick but clearer than before, thanks to the medication already flowing through her veins. Henry's throat tightened. He glanced at her, at the woman who had always seemed untouchable, now so vulnerable under the flashing lights. "My wife was a nurse," he said softly. "She taught me never to miss the signs." The doors closed, and for the first time all night, Henry stood still. The building that had always felt silent now seemed cavernous, echoing with what had just happened. He watched the ambulance speed away into the Chicago night, carrying a woman who owed her life to the lessons Rachel had left behind. Back inside, Henry walked the empty halls again, but something had changed. He wasn't just a shadow in the background anymore. Tonight, he had stepped out of it. The next morning, sunlight spilled into a small apartment on the south side of the city. The place was modest, scuffed floors, second-hand furniture, walls covered with Oliver's crayon drawings, but it was warm. Henry stood at the stove, flipping scrambled eggs onto plates, cutting toast into the dinosaur shapes his son still loved. It was a ritual they had kept since Rachel's passing, one of the few pieces of normal life they never let go. A knock came at the door just as Oliver sat down with his plate. Henry frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, surprise stopped him cold. Standing there wasn't a delivery man or a neighbour, but Amanda Blackwell herself. She looked nothing like the figure from glossy magazines. Dressed simply in jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair pulled back loosely, she seemed smaller somehow, less untouchable, more human. In her hands she carried a bouquet of sunflowers, their yellow petals bright against the grey morning. "I'm sorry to just show up," she said quietly, her voice carrying a mix of strength and vulnerability. "But I needed to thank you, you saved my life." Henry stepped aside, still caught between shock and awkwardness, and she entered. The scent of coffee and buttered toast filled the room, so different from the polished world she came from. Oliver peeked out from behind the table, his big brown eyes fixed on the stranger in their kitchen. Amanda's face softened the moment she saw him. She crouched down, meeting him eye to eye with a smile that looked different from the polite smiles she wore at charity galas. "And who is this young man?" she asked warmly. Oliver glanced at his father before answering. "I'm Oliver. Daddy makes the best dinosaur toast." Henry chuckled under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "Ollie, this is Ms. Blackwell. She wasn't feeling well last night, and Daddy helped her." Amanda's eyes glistened as she looked between father and son. "Your dad didn't just help me," she said softly. "He saved me. Do you know how special that makes him?" Oliver's small chest puffed with pride, a grin stretching across his face. "Mommy used to teach him about sick people," he said innocently, "before she went to heaven." The words landed like a quiet weight in the room. Amanda's smile faltered, her expression shifting into something deeper, understanding, almost reverence. She looked at Henry, truly looked, and for the first time saw not just the man who had stepped in at her weakest moment, but a father carrying more than most could imagine. Henry cleared his throat, trying to break the heaviness. "Can I get you some coffee? It's not the fancy kind, but it'll do." Amanda's laugh came light and unexpected, almost like relief. "Coffee sounds perfect." And just like that, in a kitchen that smelled of eggs and toast, the distance between their worlds began to shrink. Later that week, Amanda called Henry with an invitation that caught him off guard. She wanted to take him and Oliver to lunch. His first instinct was to refuse. People like her didn't usually share meals with people like him. But there was something in her voice, something softer than he had ever heard before, that made him say yes. On Saturday, Amanda pulled up outside their apartment in a modest sedan, not the sleek car Henry expected. Oliver hopped into the back seat with the unfiltered excitement of a child, and Henry followed, still uneasy about what was coming. He braced himself for a fancy restaurant where he would feel out of place, but Amanda surprised him. She turned down a familiar road and parked outside Mel's Pancake House, a diner with peeling paint and neon signs that had been buzzing for decades. Truckers, families, and retirees filled the booths, their chatter mixing with the smell of syrup and coffee. "You picked this place?" Henry asked, almost smiling despite himself. Amanda nodded, her eyes scanning the menu taped to the window. "I used to come here in college. Best chocolate chip pancakes in Chicago." Inside, they slid into a booth with vinyl seats that squeaked under them. Oliver pressed his nose against the dessert menu and declared he was ordering pancakes for lunch. Amanda laughed, a real laugh, not the polished sound Henry imagined she used in boardrooms. The meal unfolded with a surprising ease. Amanda poured Oliver extra syrup and showed him how to build towers out of sugar packets, her designer image slipping away with every smile. Henry found himself watching, realising this might be the first time he had seen her relax. At one point, while Oliver busied himself feeding quarters into the old jukebox in the corner, Amanda leaned closer. "Tell me about your wife," she said gently. Henry hesitated, his hands wrapping around the warm ceramic of his coffee cup. Rachel was a nurse, stroke rehab for 15 years. She used to quiz me on symptoms at night, made me promise I'd never ignore them. She died 2 years ago, a car accident on her way home from work. Amanda reached across the scarred table and touched his hand, a small gesture that carried more weight than words. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Henry nodded, swallowing hard. He wasn't used to talking about Rachel without people's pity filling the silence. But Amanda didn't look at him that way. She looked at him like his story mattered. For a man who had lived in the shadows of polished office towers, that kind of attention felt almost unreal. The jukebox in the corner whirred to life, spilling out an old Motown song that made Oliver bounce happily in his seat. For a moment, the diner felt like a different world. Simple, safe, filled with laughter instead of worry. But when Amanda stirred cream into her coffee, her hand trembled slightly, and Henry noticed. She tried to cover it with a smile, brushing off the movement as if it meant nothing. Still, Henry's eyes lingered. He remembered Rachel telling him how strokes rarely came out of nowhere, how there were often small warnings hiding in plain sight. "I've been having headaches for months," Amanda admitted quietly, almost as if she was confessing a secret. "Sometimes I lose track of conversations. My doctor says it's just stress. He gave me sleeping pills and told me to take a vacation." Henry set down his cup slowly, a heaviness forming in his chest. "Headaches, dizzy spells, losing focus. Those aren't just stress, Amanda. Those are warning signs. Rachel used to say you never brush that off." Amanda's expression tightened. "He's been my physician for years, one of the best. I trust him." But her voice wavered just enough to betray doubt. Henry didn't push. He wasn't trying to step into her world or tell her how to live, but the image of her slumped over that desk haunted him. He leaned forward, his tone steady but gentle. "All I'm saying is, maybe get a second opinion. Someone who doesn't already know your name or your position. Fresh eyes can see what others miss." Amanda looked down at her cup, stirring slowly, her mind clearly somewhere else. For a woman who built her life on certainty, the thought that her own body might be betraying her was something she didn't want to face. Across the table, Oliver returned, proudly announcing he'd picked a song he thought his mum would have liked. The innocence in his voice cut through the heaviness, and Amanda smiled, but her eyes carried a shadow Henry couldn't ignore. In that moment, he knew this story wasn't over. Amanda didn't say much as she dropped Henry and Oliver back at their apartment later that afternoon. She thanked Henry politely, promised to stay in touch, and then drove away with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Henry stood at the curb, watching the car disappear, uneasy. He wanted to believe she would take his advice, but something told him she wouldn't. Days passed. Henry returned to his night shifts, patrolling the quiet halls, making sandwiches for Oliver's lunch, checking homework at the kitchen table. Life carried on in its steady rhythm, but Amanda lingered in his thoughts. The tremor in her hand, the flicker of fear behind her practiced smile. Then one night he saw her again. The building was mostly dark, the city outside blanketed in winter snow. Amanda's office light glowed on the 20th floor. Henry almost walked past, but through the glass he caught sight of her hunched over a stack of papers, her right hand trembling so badly the pen slipped from her grasp. He stepped inside without knocking. Amanda looked up, startled, trying to hide the panic in her eyes. "I'm fine," she insisted, forcing her voice steady. "It's just stress. Too many reports, too little sleep." But Henry could see it wasn't fine. Her pupils looked uneven, one larger than the other. Rachel's lessons rushed back like a flood, and his chest tightened with dread. "Amanda," he said firmly, "this isn't stress. You need to get checked now." She shook her head with desperate urgency. "If the board finds out I'm sick again, they'll force me to step down. They've been waiting for an excuse. I can't lose everything I've built." Henry stood there torn, the weight of her fear pressing against his instincts. He understood the stakes, her career, her reputation, the empire she had carved out of long nights and sacrifice. But he also knew what was at risk if she ignored the truth. "Your life is worth more than any title," he said, his voice low but steady. "Let me take you to the hospital." Quietly, no ambulances, no questions, just you and me. For a long moment she stared at him, caught between pride and fear. Then finally she gave a small, shaky nod. Henry grabbed his coat and keys. The snow outside was still falling as he led her toward the elevator, every step carrying the weight of a decision that could change everything. The drive through the snowy streets felt longer than it was. Henry kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other ready to catch Amanda if she faltered. She sat in silence beside him, staring out the window, her breath fogging the glass. The woman who usually commanded rooms with confidence now seemed small, caught between fear of losing her health and fear of losing her place in the world she had built. Henry pulled into the emergency entrance at Chicago General, the same hospital where Rachel had worked for so many years. He hadn't been back since the accident that took her, and walking through those sliding doors made his chest tighten. But there was no time for grief tonight. Inside, he guided Amanda to the front desk. When the nurse asked what was wrong, Henry answered quickly, his words sharp and sure. "She's showing neurological symptoms, uneven pupils, tremors. It's urgent." The nurse blinked, surprised at the precision coming from a man in a worn winter coat. But within moments, Amanda was being rushed into an exam room. Dr. Sarah Chen, a physician who had once worked alongside Rachel, recognized Henry the moment she stepped in. "Henry Webb," she said softly, a flicker of sorrow in her eyes. "I'm so sorry about Rachel, I didn't know." Henry gave a brief nod, forcing the memories down. "She taught me enough to know Amanda needs help now." Dr. Chen turned her attention to Amanda, examining her with quick, practiced hands. After a series of questions and reflex checks, her expression grew grave. "These aren't stress symptoms," she said firmly. "This is serious. We'll need scans, blood work, the full panel." Amanda's lips parted, as though to protest, but her strength seemed to drain. Henry reached for her hand without thinking, and she gripped it tightly, as if the simple gesture kept her anchored. As the nurses wheeled her toward radiology, Amanda whispered, barely audible, "Thank you. Not just for bringing me here, but for seeing me, for not looking past me like everyone else." Henry watched her disappear down the hall, his heart heavy with a mix of dread and determination. He had walked into this night simply doing his rounds, but now he was standing in the very halls where his wife once saved lives, trying to save one himself. And somewhere deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Hours slipped by under the sterile glow of hospital lights. Henry sat in a hard plastic chair outside Amanda's room, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight. Every beep of the machines in the distance reminded him of nights he once spent waiting for Rachel to finish her shifts. Back then, he had never imagined being on this side of the door, helpless, hoping for answers. When Dr. Chen returned, the look on her face told Henry what words soon confirmed. She carried a folder of test results, but it was the heaviness in her eyes that spoke louder. "She's had multiple mini-strokes," Dr. Chen explained quietly. "Small ones that don't always show right away, but together they've caused damage. We need to treat this aggressively before it gets worse." Henry swallowed hard. "But she's been seeing a doctor. How could they miss this?" Dr. Chen hesitated, then lowered her voice. "That's what troubles me. Her records show normal readings, blood pressure, cholesterol, all within range. But what I see here doesn't match. Either the tests were misread or..." She trailed off, not finishing the thought. A cold weight settled in Henry's stomach. He remembered Amanda telling him her physician brushed everything off as stress. Convenient, too convenient. Moments later, Amanda was wheeled back into the room. She looked pale, exhausted, but her eyes searched for Henry the instant she crossed the threshold. He stood, moving to her side, and she reached for his hand as if it grounded her. "What did they say?" she asked, her voice thin. Henry glanced at Dr. Chen, then back at Amanda. He didn't want to frighten her, but honesty felt like the only way forward. "They found evidence of strokes, Amanda, more than one. You've been carrying this for a while." Her face drained of colour, her hand trembling in his. "But my doctor told me I was fine, just stress." Dr. Chen stepped in, her voice calm but firm. "That diagnosis was dangerously wrong. We'll need to review your past records. Something doesn't add up here." Amanda leaned back against the pillows, shock flooding her features. For a woman who built her entire life on control, the realization that her own health had been neglected, or worse, ignored, was almost too much to bear. Henry stayed beside her, his hand still in hers. "You're not alone in this," he said softly. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time." Amanda closed her eyes, a tear sliding down her cheek. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel what she always fought to hide: fear. The hospital room had quieted, the only sound the steady hum of machines and the faint shuffle of nurses in the hallway. Amanda lay back against the raised bed, her eyes fixed on nothing, as if she were trying to piece together a puzzle that refused to make sense. "My doctor told me I was fine," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Month after month, headaches, dizziness. He said it was all stress. He even laughed once and said, 'You're just working too hard,' and I believed him." Henry sat in the chair beside her, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He wanted to reach for her hand again, but he could see she was holding herself together with threads, and he didn't want to pull too hard on them. "Maybe he just missed something," Henry offered carefully. "Doctors are human too." Amanda turned her head toward him, her expression sharp, almost wounded. "Missed it? Henry, I trusted him with my life. I run an entire foundation built on health and prevention, and my own doctor didn't even bother to run the tests that could have saved me." Her voice cracked, the anger giving way to something softer. "Do you know how humiliating that feels?" Henry let the words hang in the air. He knew what it was to trust and lose. He had trusted that Rachel would always come home after her double shifts. He had trusted that life would give Oliver his mother longer than it did. Trust, he knew, was fragile. "You have every right to be angry," he said finally. "But don't let that anger stop you from getting the care you need now. You're here, you've still got a chance." Amanda looked at him, really looked, and something in her eyes shifted. It wasn't the polished gratitude she gave to colleagues at fundraisers. It was raw, almost desperate. "Why do you care so much?" she whispered. Henry exhaled slowly, searching for the words. "Because I made a promise. Rachel made me swear I'd never ignore the signs. She said if I could help someone, anyone, I had to do it. No excuses, no hesitation. That promise didn't end when she died." For a long moment, Amanda said nothing. Then her hand found his, fingers curling around his rough knuckles, clinging with a quiet intensity. "Then maybe," she said softly, her voice breaking, "maybe you're the only person I can trust right now." Henry sat still, the weight of her words sinking into him. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a man of influence. He was just a father doing his best, a guard in a uniform most people ignored. Yet in that moment, to her, he was something more. And as the night deepened around them, Henry realised this connection, born out of crisis, was about to change both of their lives in ways neither had planned. Amanda was released a few days later with a folder full of instructions and a new regimen of medications. Henry offered to drive her home, but she declined, insisting her driver would take care of it. Still, he noticed the hesitation in her eyes, as if she didn't want the moment between them to end so abruptly. The following Sunday, Henry was surprised when Amanda appeared at Mel's pancake house, slipping into the booth across from him and Oliver without warning. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled into a loose bun, and in place of her usual sharp composure was something almost unguarded. "I was in the neighbourhood," she said, but her smile gave her away. She had chosen to be here. Oliver lit up instantly. "You came back? Do you want pancakes again?" He waved down the waitress before she could answer, already ordering chocolate chip for all three of them. Amanda laughed, a sound that turned heads in the diner, though softer this time, like it belonged here. The meal stretched long past what Henry expected. Amanda asked Oliver about school projects, listened to him describe his dream of being a dinosaur hunter, and even helped him build another tower of sugar packets. Henry watched the two of them together, something loosening in his chest that had been tight since Rachel's death. After Oliver ran off to feed the jukebox, Amanda turned to Henry, her tone shifting. "I keep thinking about that night, about how close I came and about how no one else saw what you did." Henry shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I just remembered what Rachel taught me. Anyone would have done the same." Her eyes softened. "No, Henry, most people wouldn't. You're not giving yourself enough credit." Silence lingered between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that held meaning, a quiet acknowledgement that something unspoken was forming between two people who lived in very different worlds. When they finally stepped outside, the cold air biting against their faces, Amanda crouched beside Oliver to say goodbye. She placed a small book in his hands, a field guide about dinosaurs. "For the future hunter," she said with a wink. Oliver's grin was wide enough to melt the frost on the windows. He hugged the book to his chest, and Amanda looked up at Henry, her smile faint but real. "Thank you for letting me share a little bit of your world," she said softly. Henry nodded, unsure how to respond. Because the truth was, in the middle of pancakes and laughter, she had given something back to him too, something he hadn't realised he was missing until now. The following week, Henry noticed a different kind of restlessness in Amanda. She still showed up at the diner on Sunday, slipping into the booth like it was becoming routine, but her phone never stopped buzzing. Every few minutes she glanced at it, her smile faltering as messages piled in. Finally, she silenced the screen and pushed it face down on the table. "They're worried," she admitted, her voice carrying a mix of guilt and exhaustion. "Board members, colleagues, they've noticed I've stepped back. I haven't been in the office as much. They're starting to ask questions." Henry stirred his coffee slowly. "You don't owe them your health," he said. Amanda sighed. "That's easy to say when the company isn't on your shoulders. If they think I'm weak, they'll look for someone to replace me. And in their world, weakness doesn't mean you're sick. It means you're disposable." Oliver, oblivious to the weight of the conversation, was busy tracing dinosaurs in the book Amanda had given him. He looked up suddenly and grinned. "Miss Blackwell, do you want to see the picture I drew? Daddy says I'm getting better at the sharp teeth." Amanda's laughter rang out, soft but genuine, and she leaned across the table to admire the sketch. For a moment, the tension broke, replaced by the warmth of a child's simple joy. When Oliver dashed off to the jukebox again, Amanda's smile faded. She looked at Henry, her voice dropping. "Do you ever feel like you're living two lives at once? The one the world expects, and the one that actually keeps you breathing?" Henry thought of his night shifts, the empty apartment, the mornings with Oliver over dinosaur-shaped toast. He thought of how invisible he felt at work, and how alive he felt in these small moments. "Every day," he admitted. Amanda studied him, her eyes softer now. "You make it look simple," she whispered. Henry shook his head. "It's not simple, it's just real, and sometimes real is all we can hold on to." Her phone buzzed again, but this time she didn't reach for it. Instead, she sat back, watching Oliver laugh across the diner, and let herself breathe. For the first time in years, she was learning that not everything worth holding on to came with contracts or signatures. Some things, like trust or the comfort of a child's smile, were fragile, fleeting, but more powerful than any boardroom. By midweek, the quiet bubble Amanda had been living in started to collapse. Reporters began circling, asking why she had missed so many public appearances. Investors wanted reassurance. The board demanded updates. The very people who once praised her strength now whispered about her absence, and every whisper felt like a knife. Henry noticed the change as soon as she showed up at the diner that Sunday. Her smile was tight, her posture rigid, and for the first time she didn't order anything. She just wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee, staring down at the steam. "They know something's wrong," she admitted finally, her voice breaking. "If they find out I've been sick, they'll push me out. Everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed, gone." Henry leaned back, studying her. He could see how much of herself she had tied to her work, how much of her worth she believed lived in that corner office. He didn't judge her for it, he just knew it was tearing her apart. "Amanda," he said gently, "you nearly died at that desk. Twice. What good is all of it if it costs you your life?" Her eyes flashed with anger, but it wasn't at him, it was at herself, at the cruel bind she couldn't escape. "You don't understand," she snapped, then caught herself, her voice softening. "No, that's not fair. You understand more than anyone. You've lost more than anyone should." Oliver slid into the booth then, holding a drawing of a brontosaurus taller than the page itself. "Look," he said proudly. "This one's so big it can touch the sky." Amanda smiled at him, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She touched his paper gently, then looked back at Henry. "I don't know how you do it," she whispered. "Working nights, raising him alone, holding it all together. You act like it's easy." Henry shook his head. "It's not easy. It's just the only thing that matters. I work so he eats. I keep going so he knows he's not alone. That's the trade I made, and I'd make it every day." Amanda's throat tightened. She could feel the truth of it pressing against the fear she had been carrying. For all her power, for all her wealth, she had built her life on things that could vanish with a vote. Henry had built his on something that could not be taken away. And in that quiet corner of a diner filled with chatter and clinking plates, Amanda realised she was standing at the edge of a choice. Keep holding on to the life that was draining her, or risk letting it go for something real. Amanda didn't return to the office that week. Instead, she found herself in places she hadn't visited in years. Quiet parks, old cafes, even the public library where she once studied as a young woman. Each step away from the glass towers felt like shedding a layer of armour she no longer had the strength to carry. Late one evening, she showed up at Henry's apartment unannounced. Oliver was already asleep, curled up under his blanket with toy dinosaurs scattered around him. Henry opened the door, surprised, but the look on Amanda's face stopped him from asking questions. She looked worn down, but certain, as if she had finally stopped running. "I handed in a letter this morning," she said softly. "Not a resignation, a leave, a long one." Henry motioned her inside. That must not have been easy. She laughed faintly, though there was no humour in it. "It felt like cutting off a limb. For years that job has been my identity. But I kept hearing your words in my head. What good is all of it if it costs me my life?" She sat at the edge of the worn couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I don't know what comes next, Henry. I only know I can't keep living like before." For a while the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. Henry sat across from her, studying this woman who once seemed untouchable, but now looked so deeply human, stripped of titles and power. "You don't have to know what comes next," he said finally. "Sometimes it's enough to just survive the moment you're in. The rest will come." Amanda's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to hide. "Do you ever wish you could go back? To before everything changed?" Henry thought of Rachel, of the night she never came home, of the mornings he woke to Oliver's small hand searching for comfort. "Every day," he admitted, "but wishing doesn't bring it back. All I can do is keep building with what I have left." Her gaze drifted toward Oliver's bedroom door, where the faint sound of his steady breathing could be heard. For a long time she just sat there, listening, as if the simple rhythm of a child sleeping was the reminder she needed of what truly mattered. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. "You've given me something no one else has, Henry, a reason to breathe again." Henry watched her step into the hallway, her figure framed by the dim light. And he knew then that whatever future lay ahead, it would not be defined by titles or positions, but by the quiet strength of choices made for life, not for power. Winter melted slowly into spring, and with it, Amanda's life began to take on a different shape. She no longer filled her days with endless meetings and late-night strategy sessions. Instead, she spent quiet afternoons visiting community health centres, listening to patients whose voices rarely reached the halls of power. For the first time in years, she was learning to simply be present. Every Friday afternoon, without fail, Amanda would park near Henry's modest apartment, or sometimes outside the small art studio he had begun to build with Oliver. She never stayed long, just long enough to watch from a distance, to remind herself that life still held space for something real. Henry noticed, of course. He'd catch the familiar outline of her car across the street while he and Oliver painted sunflowers or sketched dinosaurs. And though she rarely came inside, he understood. She didn't need grand gestures. She only needed to know that the connection they had forged in crisis was still alive, still breathing. One Friday, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Amanda finally stepped out of her car. She carried a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. Without knocking, she leaned it gently against the studio door, then turned back toward the street. Henry waited until she drove away before unwrapping it. It was a painting, rough, imperfect, but full of heart. It showed Henry and Oliver sitting at the table, brushes in hand, laughter frozen in bright strokes of colour. On the back, in Amanda's careful handwriting, were 3 simple words: "What I see." Henry stood there for a long time, holding the canvas as Oliver tugged at his sleeve, curious. "It's us, Daddy," Oliver whispered, his smile wide. "She painted us." Henry placed the painting on the wall above their table, next to Oliver's drawings. He didn't call Amanda to thank her, didn't send a message. He knew she would come again next Friday, and the week after that. Because some connections don't need names or labels. They live in gestures, in quiet acts of care, in the distance that still binds 2 people together. And so, while the city outside rushed on with its noise and ambition, Henry and Amanda found peace in something far rarer, a bond born in crisis but sustained by choice, proof that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories are the ones that never ask to be called love at all. Life's true worth isn't measured by titles or power, but by the moments we choose to care for one another. Even small acts of courage and compassion can change a life, and sometimes save it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time. If you found meaning in it, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you again in the next story, here on Rain Inside.